This is a long chapter, and I've decided to read the Apocryphal edition. So it's going to be 92 verses. I'm totally kidding. For a little bit of context, and thank you to Garth. These slides are tremendous, and Garth has actually kindly let me reuse these. And so I've, of course, added some things because I just can't leave well enough alone. But the framework here is tremendous, and thank you, Garth. I appreciate it. So we'll get you some context. And I don't know where you found these photos, but these are tremendous. But you know, Daniel and his young friends, right? So this is chapter 1. He arrives and says, "Please don't give me the food. Don't like the rich food. Want to be faithful." And so he declines that food, and of course we know how that story works out. It turns fantastic, right? The Lord blesses them, and Nebuchadnezzar declares, like, "Wow, you got you got a pretty good deal going here." So then, of course, he has the dreams. He finds out Daniel can interpret the dreams, and so he sends for Daniel, and Daniel tells him, "Hey, here's what you dreamed. No human could do this, but I'm relying on the power of God." And so he gives God the glory and then translates the dream, right? So he tells Nebuchadnezzar, of course, "Hey, you're that big gold head on the top of the statue, but then everything else is, coming after you." And here's what I think. I don't think Nebuchadnezzar took too keenly to that. And so he declares, right, that God's super powerful and pretty amazing. But then I think pretty immediately he starts thinking to himself, but like, I don't want my kingdom to end. So what does he do? He breaks out and builds, I messed up somewhere. There's supposed to be a fire, or there's supposed to be a statue, right? So he builds a big statue of himself and says, "Hey, when you hear," and then he lists a bunch of musical instruments that I can't memorize, and says, "When you hear this instruments, fall down and worship this." And of course, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are like, "No." And they get in trouble, as you might imagine. And so he threatens to throw them into the fiery furnace. And so that's where we're going to pick up today. But that has happened roughly, math is hard, about 15 years later, right? Is when that's going to happen. So here's Nebuchadnezzar, right, who the Lord revealed himself to by interpreting his dream. And Nebuchadnezzar, of course, has put up this statue and said, "Yeah, I think I'm actually pretty good. I'm pretty amazing." And so he wants everybody to agree with him and tells them, like, let's agree with how amazing I am. So we're going to start in Daniel, and I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I'm using the slides as kind of the reminders. So in case anybody's interested, the people that he's invited to this ceremony, if you will, right, is basically the satraps, the prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials. So basically, he's got the entire government. He said, "Okay, all of you, you're going to come out, and you're going to come to this statue that I've erected." And roughly, it depends on about how you measure a cubit, right? But a cubit is supposed to be from basically your elbow to the extension here. Most modern scholars declared that that's about 18 inches. So they've got what they call the royal cubit, and then you got somebody like Saul, who was actually a big beast of a man, and so like this distance for him was probably longer. And so they've actually got what they call the 21 to 22 inch measurement. And so the cubit is one of those things that you never really know how big it is. But if we take 60 cubits, so we do some math, right, it's roughly 75 feet. And then if you do the royal cubit, it's roughly 85 feet. So it's a big statue. They actually think they found the platform where they put the statue. French archaeologist earlier this past century. Wow, isn't that fun to say? This past century. So anyway, this French archaeologist thinks he found that platform where they had the statue, right? Obviously, like the dream, the statue is gone now. But it was probably a pretty impressive sight. And so the entire government turned out, and what did he tell them? "As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither," whatever that is, "the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Wow. I don't know about you guys, but the thought of getting thrown immediately into a blazing furnace it's kind of scary, right? That's like straight up death sentence. So in essence, he's saying, like, fall down and worship me or I'll kill you. And we're going to read, like, how impressive this actually is. There's my picture. Dang it. See, Garth, I messed with the slides and I got them all out of order and used the different picture. But there's this really cool picture. And then, of course, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego not bowing down. That was actually, we have no idea really where it was, but based on the description, they think it was here just south of Babylon on the, well, we know it's in Dura, but we don't know where that was, but they think it's just south of Babylon. And so here in modern day Iraq, that would be further south of Baghdad. Okay. This is where I'm going to, I call this the interlude. So we're going to take just a hot second and we're going to talk through a couple of things. So he set up this image of gold, right? And he's declared, I want everybody to worship this. The Septuagint said that happened in the 18th year. Daniel is, Daniel 2 is 3 to 5 years in, and then Daniel 3 is about 15 to 18 years in. What do we think Nebuchadnezzar's view of Jehovah is? Because it's changed, right? Yeah.
Put back in chapter 2 and look at what Daniel told him. He was the head of gold, now all of a sudden he's erected this golden statue. So he's got an eagle the size of Dallas.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty apt description. I might posit that it's even bigger than Dallas, but nonetheless, it is quite an ego problem, and it's kind of surprising, right? So, have you ever been in a place where you're enjoying something amazing that God has done, and then some time passes, and then that amazing thing that God has done is sort of like not first and foremost in your mind anymore? I think that's where Nebuchadnezzar is, right? Like he basically had all his magicians tell him, no human can do what you're asking when they said, tell me what my dream was. And so every wise man, so this is the metropolitan center of the world, and they told him, like, you can't do that. No one could. And then Daniel arrives and says, actually, the Lord Jehovah can. And so he tells him what the dream was and then interprets it, right? And so I think that's a pretty impressive feat, and Nebuchadnezzar is basically really impressed by that. But 15 years later, I think he's impressed by himself, right? And so I think that's an interesting juxtaposition of kind of how it happens for us. Does anybody else feel like every once in a while you kind of forgot all the amazing things God has done for you, and you're in the middle of something, and suddenly you're thinking to yourself, like, is God going to take care of this? Anybody, am I the only one? I'm the only one.
We often become complacent in our faith.
Yeah.
It's easy when things are going well to remember, and if we get off the path, if something happens, it's us that walk away. And then they always say that if something is in between you and Christ, don't mistake who did the movie.
That's a fantastic way to look at it. Yeah. Sherry?
We work hard as human beings to do something right, wonderful. And it's very, very easy to start thinking about how great I did this wonderful thing. It's caught by, and you start forgetting about the gifts you had, the age you had in the first place, everything you did with God. But somehow it just kind of
Yeah. Yeah, isn't that amazing? I have a sign that my wife bought and stuck in our house, and it says something like, the things I'm complaining about are the things I prayed about years ago. And so if any of you have ever had a dog who was annoying, I'm sure you prayed, right, about that dog. And the Lord has, I have an escape artist, and he gets out and then doesn't come back for a good long while, and so you worry that, something happened to him. And so you pray, like, God, please keep this idiot dog safe. And he does, and then you bring the dog back, and then the next day, you're kicking the dog, thinking, like, seriously, do you have to keep barking at, like, everything? And so I think it's really, really important to think about what is the key. This is so Google wants to read us the rest of the Bible, but I think it's really key because we can forget. Nebuchadnezzar did it. I think we do it, and so we can be in a place where that happens. Okay, so they keep going. So they heard so he's got the statue set up, right? He's got all the government sitting there, and then what does he do? He plays the music, right? He does the thing. And the astrologers came forward and said, hey, what's really funny to me is that picture we saw, of course, right? The three of them are standing up. So it'd be really apparent if you were standing in a crowd of people that they hadn't done this, right? So I'm not quite sure that that's how that went down because, in essence, a bunch of the wise men, astrologers, etc., they come forward and tell King Nebuchadnezzar, hey, those guys you put over us, like the ones we're jealous of, they didn't bow down. So I'm not really sure like how that all happened, right? Like what the mechanics of that are. But nonetheless, I think you got some jealous people who are looking for an opportunity to take down God's people, and that never goes well. So they tell the king, hey, and it's funny. They basically read him the law, which if you did that to me, I'd be cranky. But remember, you issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music was fall down. Really? We're going to repeat this again? So they say, and you said you're going to throw them into the fiery furnace. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't. So furious with rage, King Nebuchadnezzar summons Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they were brought before the king, and he says, "Is it true? I said you were supposed to bow down and worship. Is it true? Did you not?" And so, again, now when you hear the sound of the horn, okay, you get the point. Another interlude: the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music. There are many scholars who believe that this list of instruments is actually a reason that Daniel was not written by Daniel, because some of these were basically translated from the wrong place. So they were, in essence, they've got what they believe to be archaeological evidence for things, and so some of these instruments didn't come along until later. And so, like, let's all get cranky about this. I'm going to tell you, I don't consider myself a scholar. And so take this with a grain of salt, but I will tell you that I do consider the Word of God to be inspired. And so I think when we get sideways with ourselves because like some random thing that happened 2,000, 3,000 years ago, like we think we have it right. We think we know what happened 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, and we want to argue about whether or not the Bible is actually inspired. I think that destroys the faith. So personally, I believe that this is inspired stuff. Daniel wrote Daniel, and the Lord has something to tell us with this book. So if you're ever reading a commentary and the commentary is telling you that like that's not how it is, because the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, blah 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 blah, then I think you can pretty safely ignore that. That's just a little interlude for you there. Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar, there at the last. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Okay, so here's our ego the size of Dallas, right? This is pretty impressive. And so if you're Nebuchadnezzar, you've actually conquered most of the known world. And all of the people that you've conquered probably had gods, and those gods didn't save you. So therefore, I must be the most powerful. My gods must be the most powerful, right? Because you are all subject to me. So it's kind of unsurprising. It's very it's very egotistical, but kind of unsurprising. And so why do you think he gave him a second chance? So we've got Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? Who in verse 13, he's furious with rage. So the astrologers come and say, hey, they didn't bow down. And so he summons them to basically read them the riot act. So he reads them the riot act, right? He said that the law said, if you don't, I will immediately throw you into the fire. So he summons them and says, hey, did you do it? And they said, no. So does he immediately throw them into the fire? No, he asks them a question. Why do you think he asked them a question? He wants them to be okay. He doesn't really want to do it. Yeah. Yeah. I think the Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? They're from the Jewish remnant, and the Lord is blessing them. I have to believe that they're actually doing really good work. So Nebuchadnezzar probably knows that the Lord is blessing them and probably doesn't want to do this, right? The same way that Darius, as we'll get to when Daniel goes into the lion's den, Darius didn't want to take him into the lion's den, right? I think that they sort of understand this. And I think you guys are right. They don't really want to. He doesn't really want to do this. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego tell him, we don't need to defend ourselves. If we're thrown into the fiery furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. So they answer the question, right? He challenges them and says, what God can save you? And they're like, our God can save you. And then I think, though, verse 18 is one of my favorite parts of this section. But even if he does not, we want you to know, Your Majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you've set up. So, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are in this interesting spot, right? Like, the king has said, if you don't do it, I'm going to kill you. So, straight away, they've already had to sort of like steel themselves and decide not to do it. And now the king has brought them to him, and ostensibly to give them a chance, right, to fall down and worship him, and they don't take it. So again, they steel themselves and they don't fall down and worship. And so the verse 18, but even if he does not, so they understood God's sovereignty, right? God is king, and he has a plan. So whether he saves us or he doesn't save us, he's the king. So we're not going to bow down and worship you. Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar, he spends the whole chapter furious. So he's furious, right? His attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. Okay, 7 times hotter than usual. This is an interesting turn of phrase, and it is basically something akin to make it as hot as it will go. So it wasn't like a literal, we can measure how hot the temperature is, right? Like it's 1,000 degrees, so make it 7,000. It wasn't like that. But basically, Nebuchadnezzar was mad, and he said, make that furnace as hot as it can be, okay? So he commanded his strongest soldiers, and they tied up, not him, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and threw him into the blazing furnace. Now, it's sort of just an interesting aside here, verse 21. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. So the commentators it's kind of like, why would you throw this piece of detail in there? Well, probably because you wanted them to burn faster, right? Like, let's give the fire even more ways to cut them up. So I've got the hottest furnace possible. I don't think it really needed it, but there's just sort of an interesting detail. And you'll see why they hit the detail here in a second, but that whole, like, they went in their clothes. Okay, so let's talk about the furnace. We don't know what the furnace looked like, but this picture here on the right is a picture of a kiln in Ireland. So it's where they make bricks, basically. Okay, so there on the top, where you can't really see, but you go up behind that thing, because they built it into a hill, you go up onto the top of that thing, and then you can feed the fire. All right, and so that fire gets... most commentators talk about to actually make bricks, you need a kiln that can reach about 1,700 degrees. And as you can see down here in the opening, you can actually see into the furnace. So throughout the years, they've had many famous people who have painted pictures You can see there on the left, that's actually a famous guy from the 1800s, Gustave Doré. And so he's got this whole, like, I don't know, there's a bonfire and they're sort of standing below him kind of thing. That's probably not how that one happened, but an interesting way to go at it. And then, of course, there's the the backyard kiln that you see around, and Nebuchadnezzar's apparently just hanging out and watching. And most of the artists, of course, have some variation of this, like we're standing in front of it. So what most scholars believe is those soldiers took them up the ramp, right, to throw them into the fire. And the flames actually reach out from the furnace and kill the soldiers. And so then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fall into the furnace. And so they're walking about in the furnace. So obviously, you've got King Nebuchadnezzar who's sort of watching from a distance, probably, but he can see inside the furnace. So, all right, I promised I was going to read you the apocryphal editions. So, for those of you who don't know, I didn't until a few years ago, but the apocryphal stuff is basically in the Septuagint, right, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. And Paul told us all about this when we studied through how do we get the Bible. But you end up in this place where the Septuagint actually has this insertion, right? Verses 23 to 50 is what I can't remember what the Catholics call it, but in the Catholic Bibles they actually have what this is. And 23 through 50 is the prayer of Azariah, and remember that's Abednego's name, right? And then 51 through 91 is the Song of the Three Holy Children. So I'll read you a couple of verses from this stuff because I think it's fascinating. But when the Bible, the Masoretic text is actually the original Hebrew. It is not in the original Hebrew. So that's why our Bibles do not include it, because most of the scholars who were putting together the Bible don't believe that was original. And as we read it, you'll get a sense of it feels like a song, which, it's kind of funny the name of a song, but it feels like a song that maybe they sang, and then they sort of like got confused and it got added in there, sort of a thing. But one of the most interesting parts of the apocryphal edition is this verse 47. Those flames rose 49 cubits. So basically, the flames were as high as the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had built, according to this translation. And it is just a fascinating sort of addition, not inspired as most people believe. But he throws them in there, and then in verse 50, inside the furnace, as though a dew-laden breeze were blowing through it. The fire in no way touched them or caused them pain or harm. And these three in the furnace with one voice sang. And then we'll go through that. So that they walk in and they talk about the prayer of Azariah, and this is the classic sort of Moses sermon that he gave to the Israelites. We've been terrible. You've been gracious. We've been really terrible. You've still been gracious. We've been super really terrible. You've been gracious. And it goes on like that for many verses. And then it gets to the Song of the Three Holy Children, right? So they're saved from the fire. They're walking around. And then they get into this, blessed are you, O Lord, the God of our ancestors, praiseworthy and exalted above all forever. And so that continues. So for almost 40-something verses, they basically go through the temple of your holy glory, throne of your kingdom, look to the depths, and then there's praiseworthy and exalted above all forever is sort of the refrain, right? The answer to this amazingness. So it's an interesting read. If you get a second, you're welcome to read through it. It is, I think it's fascinating, but again, not part of the inspired text. Certainly not part of the Hebrew. Not part of the Hebrew in the original. Okay, so the king had thrown them into the furnace. They were tied up. They fell in, and then he is amazed because what happens? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego don't get burned up. Like, wow, I see four men walking around in the fire, unbound, unharmed, and the fourth looks like a son of the gods. Now, there's plenty of arguing in commentaries about the son of the gods. many people believe that this is what we call a prefiguring of Christ. So that was actually Christ there in the fire. And then the scholars want to argue about whether or not King Nebuchadnezzar knew it was Christ. I don't think it matters. He knew it was something amazing, right? There was a fourth person in there, and Nebuchadnezzar attributed him as though he were in some translations you'll see angel, but it's an angel of God. Looking backwards, we can see, right, this is another display of God's amazing power, right? And that whole idea that could be the Jesus who is fulfilling the will of God by saving these three men, I think is it's worth thinking about. I have no proof, but I think that it's pretty amazing. Okay, so he approached the opening and shouts, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God. So suddenly, right, like I've said, who can save you from my hand? What God can save you from my hand? And threw him into the fire. And now, like, oh, look at that. Like God saved him from his hand. So I think he's starting to get it. And saw that they hadn't been harmed at all. Not a hair on their head was singed. Their robes were not scorched, and no smell of fire on them, right? So pretty amazing. So here we are back at the clothes, right? So they left the clothes on them, and as it turns out, the clothes are actually another testament to the power of God. So he says, praise be to them, and then in essence declares that this is God and we should worship him, right? So, I think it's a nice little way to hit it. So we don't have a lot of time left. We're not going to get to all of these, but we'll start with this one. Do you think persecution serves God's purpose? Okay. How do you think it serves God's purpose? I guess it's contextual, right? It depends. But like, do you have an example? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have an example, right? Do we have an example? The death of the apostles, that's a good one, yeah. From antiquity, absolutely. Yep.
Not making a specific example, but persecution in general probably it shows the greatest amount of faith that would be required for something. So in a way, it's like the ultimate test of faith.
Yeah. And it's the kind of test that you sort of want to get but don't want to get. Anybody else? Persecution serving God's purpose.
The whole statement from this whole quotation. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't bow, didn't bend, they didn't burn.
They didn't bow, they didn't ban, and they bend. Got it. They didn't bow or bend, and so they didn't burn. Yeah. No, that's pretty amazing. I like that. Thanks for sharing that. Okay. The reason I spent a second on that one is because the second question is really kind of like, okay, how do you apply this? So if we're living sacrifices, are we ready to actually be sacrificed? Right? So this is kind of an interesting thought. One of the commentaries I was reading actually talked about Isaac, right? And like Abraham had him bound and he was on the altar, right? As they would walked up to the altar, he said, where's the sacrifice? And Abraham said, the Lord's going to provide. And then he was on the altar, right? And basically his dad was going to bring the knife down, and then the Lord stopped everything, right? Like he was, in fact, the sacrifice. And because of his willingness to sacrifice him, God stopped all that, and then Abraham became the promise, right? And so there's this interesting thought, like, are we ready to be the living sacrifice, right? And it's difficult, yeah. Like, I gotta tell you, like, if I ask myself that question, if I answer that honestly, I don't know that the answer is, yeah, I'm ready to lay down on an altar. I'm ready to be sacrificed. So how do we maintain that kind of faith? What does that look like today? All right, you can pull the question. I'm going to stand here and make somebody answer it, but you can pull the question. We don't need any more of the questions because we're not going to get to them. But how does that look today? What does it look like faith like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Garth.
I doubt that we are prepared to make the sacrifice early. It's almost God gives you the grace to try this blessing.
Mm.
We're building up faith, we're building up all this, exactly how we're going to respond. But I can't say, yeah, I'll have it that way.
Yeah.
If I do, it'll be called right back. God gives you the ability.
He steals you, yeah. I agree. Anyone else?
The Romans were told to be a living sacrifice.
Uh-huh.
So, that would be, it's one of those things that we design our Christian life after.
Yeah. This idea of sacrifice, I want you to think about it this week, right? We've got this incredible story about these three men who were willing to sacrifice their own life. And remember, even if he does not save us, that meant they were ready to die. And we can use this story as inspiration, right? To build our faith. Because I got to tell you, I'm not sure that I'm in that same place, right? Like, I don't know that I'm ready to die, but I think that God can put the steel in our spines and make it end. So, Johnny, last word. Last word.
There's a couple of messages coming out of this. Obviously, God sending a message to Nebuchadnezzar that he is the supreme God, much more powerful than God's Babylonians. One of the biggest things facing God's people through the Bible up to this point is the possibility of being drawn into Satan's worship when they got into other areas.
Mm-hmm.
Israel or Judah was going to be in Babylon for 70 years and what Nebuchadnezzar had selected 4 young men that they were going to groom to show the superiority of Babylonians and their gods. And what the strength of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is sending a very clear message in response of God to this to the Jews that they needed to stay faithful during the 70 years of captivity, which was a powerful message they needed, or there would be no remnant to come back to Jerusalem.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. All right, I got nothing better than that. So thank you guys for your attention. Next week, we're going to do Are You Ready?